One of the things I strive for the most when it comes to the reviews that I do, honestly, just life in general, but definitely the reviews, is I try to be as fair as possible. Some people dispute that and disagree with that, but they're wrong. I do try very hard to be as fair as I can to any game I cover. A game that is bad still has good points to it, and a game that is good still has bad points to it. You know, if you put something up on a pedestal, you're doing it and yourself a disservice, yada, 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 right? The reason I mentioned that was this was an interesting and tasking game to go through. Because it would be easy to just say, this game sucks, and move on. But that's not fair, and it's also not really true, is it? Let's talk about gameplay first, as I often do. The game does several things quite right. It is legitimately fun to run around with your guns and your vehicles and your companion and just kind of knock over towns, or outposts rather, and claim them, and then get resources from them and fight the enemies and do the missions and yada yada yada. There are a couple issues, but there's some good stuff here. The enemy AI is decent. It's not the best stuff I've ever seen, but they do have degrees of permanence with regards to location. And I know that's a weird thing to point out, but it means tactics are added to the display. So for example, if your buddy over there is seen and you are not, you're still in stealth, you can sneak around and do something. If you are seen, but then you manage to reposition, they're all flanking to where you used to be. And I know that's relatively minor stuff, but it does add a necessary layer to the combat, which honestly otherwise would be really, really boring. Because it's very simple. It's kind of the Dragon Age 2 thing, except not as repetitive. So I'm with that. That's enjoyable. It does have pretty good co-op campaign. So there's a couple of limitations. The other person doesn't get credit to their campaign if they happen to care. And you can't be outside of like about a click away from yourself. Like we did some tests. Pax and I played this game last night online, and it was fun. You know, we could do a lot of stuff. We did some pretty extensive tests and tried out pretty much every game mode, and it's pretty legit. He gets all the credit and stuff, and except for story credits, the only thing he doesn't get. You can't be too far away from each other, and I can't give him guns, which makes sense. But he gets all the resources and materials from stuff, and he can get his own unlocks, and he sees me and I see him, and we can talk and coordinate. It's fun. It is reasonably well done, and you can do it throughout the entirety of the core campaign, which is awesome. So, good campaign co-op, awesome. I also like the companion system. You can't have companions and another player, which kind of sucks, but that's okay, because the companions are decent. So the thing is, I hesitate to say that because the companions are either good, very good, or crap. I tried out every companion I got a hold of, and it seems the AI for the allies just doesn't know how to deal with certain types of tactics. So the pastor, the guy with the shotgun, he sucks because the AI doesn't really know how to get in range with him. He's listed as a berserker, but he'll act like anybody else with an assault rifle, so he'll just stay back. So he misses a lot and gets hit a lot and doesn't really do a lot. By contrast, Carmina, who actually has an assault rifle, she does fine because, you know, she's acting like she has an assault rifle. But there's some caveats to that too. So Gina, who has an LMG, does fine, and indeed is a little bit more berserkery than the pastor, which is just weird. Yes, I know you can order them to attack people, by the way. I did that all the time, as anybody who watched the stream can attest to. But the really weird one for me was Yana, or whatever her name was, the old woman, who, she has a sniper rifle. The thing is, if you're in any kind of open arena, like, there's one where you have to take out like this depot, and it's just like this nice big open space. She's gold at that, because she will attack at her range, which is huge, because she has a sniper rifle. So you can just get out some binoculars and kill that one, kill that one, and she'll do it. The moment, however, that she has to deal with anyone who is behind a wall or goes into a door or whatever, her AI just kind of breaks, and she will spend a weirdly large amount of time trying to figure out how to reach that person before finally effectively running up into melee and trying to melee them with a sniper rifle, which works out exactly as well as you'd think it would. I have actually a specific example of that. There's this one outpost, which is under like this giant dome on a hill. I forget what it's called. She had no idea how to deal with that because there are just too many walls and too many buildings in her way. So, totally useless there. But the companions, which have decent weapons, medium-range weapons, it seems to do a good job with. So you might think, well, hang on, Laura, that just sounds like that's not great, but not good. Well, the animal companions have a completely separate AI script. They function differently, and they act differently, and they are extremely useful. So one of them is a dog named Timber. This is minor spoilers, by the way. He is the goodest dog. He gets lots of scritches. And what he is he is your scout. He is there if you don't want to get into combat at all. He is the person that, so what he'll do is he can first of all just maul down and kill, just straight up kill anyone if they're a rank 1. There's 4 ranked enemies. 1, 2, 3, 4, gray, blue, purple, and gold, respectively. So if I call him that's I'm not doing it on purpose because I kept calling him gold or purples on the stream. Anyways, so anything that's gray, he could just straight up kill. He can't do almost anything to the higher level stuff. So that's a problem. But that's okay because he's not really meant to. He is meant to mark them. He is listed as a scout and he's very good at it. His abilities as you level him up is he gives you sight. So you will be able to see items, loot, and the like, as well as objects of importance, and of course, enemies, and they'll be highlighted. You know how in like Assassin's Creed, when you put on Eagle Vision, you can see through walls and stuff like that, and the yellow is the target, and red is the enemy, and blue is the ally. That kind of a thing. And so he will give you that kind of vision, which is extremely useful when you're stealthing your way through a base. The whole point is he's there as your scout, and you got your bow or whatever you've got, and you're just, taking out the enemies one by one while he's telling you where they are. It works out very well. But if you want to go loud, well, Timber gets a lot less useful when you go loud because, again, of the aforementioned problem. He will scare off other animals. That's useful. And obviously enemy animals are a problem too. But if you want to go loud, well, that's what we got another person for. His name is Horatio, and he's a boar. Now, we've actually talked about this a couple times very casually. Boars are one of those terrifying creatures in real life. They are big, mean death machines on hooves, and that is exactly what he is. Horatio is stupid good. In fact, I would almost say he's overpowered, except he's kind of not, because he's only really overpowered for one specific playstyle, which is running in and shooting everything, which is an acceptable playstyle, but he's what you use when you want to do that. He's also the companion to go to when you go loud. He will take so much damage before he goes down. He has tons of health. I didn't even finish upgrading their health fully, and he still had tons of health. And he hits like a truck. He also ignores armor and can break shields. He also has an ability that allows him to self-res, and periodically he has a cooldown ability which allows him to charge through multiple enemies at once, instantly killing all of them. One of the first missions I ever did after getting him was one of the recruitment missions. It's the guy with the plane, Carmina's dad, I forget his name. And it was like, oh my god, there's 2 purples defending it. And at that point in the game, I was having trouble with purples, which is the level 3 people. I'm like, oh god, okay, what do Horatio, go distract that guy, go tank him, because I was thinking that's what he'd do, and I'll go deal with this other guy. And it took me this whole time, and by the time I had almost killed my guy, Horatio had soloed his. I remind you, this is right after I recruited him, so he wasn't leveled at all. That's Horatio. Both of them are very useful, and you can control them to a degree, and it really does legitimately add to the gameplay. Not to say the gameplay is flawless, of course. There are several issues, the biggest which being... So, okay, this is something that I've started doing about 2 years ago. This is just the first game we've really covered that has this issue in spades. Nowadays, we give negatives to games that do microtransactions incorrectly. Now, I shouldn't have to explain this, but I'll just use this game as an explanative. So, there's microtransactions in this game. Okay, that's already possibly a bad thing. But they do the predatory thing, where they try to make it visually appealing to buy the bigger packs. And they do the thing where it's like, this is the best value, or this is good, or whatever. And then they tell you, you get these extra bits free for buying this pack. It's so much of a better deal. So that's cute. Nice little base level, but nevertheless existent psychological manipulations. That's fun. But then there's the fact that in almost every step of the game, when you're, and this would have taken so much extra work, when you're trying to craft something, or spawn a vehicle, or upgrade something, there's a thing that says, oh, well, you can spend these materials, or, you could buy it with real money. You could buy it with the Far Cry credits, or whatever they're called. You could do that. And then when you hit the prompt to say, no, I'd like to craft this thing, a new prompt will show up saying you want to make with materials, or you could buy it with real money. And it's just shoved in your face constantly, and I hate it. 2 negatives to gameplay. So that sucks. I know this is kind of normal. Doesn't make it not bad. Normal is not a defense or a benefit one way or the other. Which, of course, leads me to another thing this game has problematically wise when it comes to gameplay. The missions are reasonably fun sometimes, but when they suck hard. You can quote me on that. There's this one mission where you have to go in, you have to willingly give yourself up to go into a prison, which is one of the dumbest things we do in the game. It's not the dumbest thing we do in the game, which says a lot. But anyways, we go into that mission. It's like, okay, cool. So we're here. Cool. Mission. Let's do it. So we're helpless and hopeless, and we have to do this thing, and okay, that's kind of neat. And then we have a moment where we have to break out and go kill the guy. Now, my immediate thinking is, okay, one of the better Assassin's Creed style games, right? Where you have, there's your target, here's you, figure it out. No, the game wants you to do an extremely linear set of sequences to do this. How linear? Check this out. So you have to go sneak over here, grab a shiv, sneak over here, kill this guy, get the key, sneak over there, get into the room, and then sneak up there and kill him. Okay, that sounds relatively straightforward. And linearity is not inherently a bad thing. Here's the problem. So I go over, sneak over, grab the shiv, sneak over, kill the guy, alarm instantly goes up. Do note that I stealthily killed him. It's the Assassin's Creed one, and they just fall over. And the whole alarm one, and everyone was trying to kill me, and I'm like, okay. During this, I happened to accidentally stumble just outside the wall of the prison. Now, it is possible to get back up and in. It's just, I immediately failed the mission because I left the mission boundary. Okay. So we try it again. Except this time I decided to go to him first, see if there's something I did wrong with the previous thing. Except here, I didn't have the shiv, which meant the takedown option was not even available. Now, this is important. He was a rank 1. Keep that in mind. It's going to come up in a minute. So he's a rank 1 enemy, and I go to do the takedown, and it doesn't let me. The button for the takedown, if you're not doing a takedown, is melee strike. So I just punch him, and he raises the alarm, and I die. Okay. And then I respawn, and I already have the key, and the game tells me to go and infiltrate the mission. What? Yeah, it just skipped over a step. Do keep in mind, this is after I'd successfully gotten the key the first attempt. And then the second attempt I didn't have it, and then the third attempt I did. Okay, so I go ahead and sneak into the prison. Now, I think, all right, I need to get up to the roof to go kill him. So I could already think of 2 separate routes to do that in. 3, actually. So I start doing the first route. I'm having issues because what I encounter is a rank 2 enemy, which I cannot do a takedown on. This is probably the biggest flaw of this mission by far. The game forces you to have none of your tools or kit, to sneak or kill your way up to a boss, who is a rank 3, by the way, and then kill that boss. It is within the realm of possibility to do this mission and get effectively soft-locked on it, because you might literally not have the ability to kill him, because he's a rank 3. You need to spend multiple perk points, quite a few, to rank up to be able to do a takedown on a 2, and then a takedown on a 3. There's also a takedown on a 4. So those cost perk points, and I didn't have those perk points to spend. By great fortune, I had recently spent perk points on the drug powers, which you get in this game. And so that enabled me to go into drug mode and punch the guy to death, because you hit like a truck when you're in drug mode. Cool. But if it wasn't for that, if I didn't have that power or the other one, I think it's technically possible to do that mission, but I'm not 100% sure how, because most of the enemies are rank 2, which means you can't do takedowns, which means you'd have to punch a rank 2 enemy to death in order to get their weapon while other enemies are coming after you because you've just raised the alarm, in order to be able to go up and kill the guy who's rank 3 with a garbage weapon, because all these enemies have level 1 weapons. You see the problems here? This is what I mean by the linearity. They clearly want you to do the mission in a specific way, but they do nothing to ensure that you can. That's not the only mission like that, but it's the worst by far, and that's why I'm kind of calling attention to it. There's a whole lot of cutscene incompetence in this game, which I suppose is a good enough segue to talk about the real problem with this game. Because the gameplay is ultimately generically enjoyable. I will probably enjoy replaying this game with my friend Pax when we do our Far Cry playthrough, which we're going to do later this year. But the story is garbage. I believe I have given this game, I think it's the 3rd worst story score I've ever given a game so far of the new games, obviously, of the ones that currently count. Post-Oblivion line. Not a great story. And one of the things I did on stream is I literally took the gloves off to really emphasize that, okay, we're going to be fair, and I did give several positives to story, but we're going to be fair by also mentioning just how many problems this game has. Problem number 1. Its premise is very generic. Now, hear me out for a moment. You can still take a generic premise and do a lot with it. zombie apocalypse. That is one of the most generic premises we have right now. Or a war between two powers, or there's an evil overlord. All these are very generic premises, which can and have been used to good effect. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I mention it because we're already starting kind of downhill, alright? The premise here is there's been a post-apocalypse, we've got a Fallout thing going on, but you're stuck in this area and you're trying to help the locals build up because they're having bandit issues. Pretty basic, but again, there's a lot you could do with that. Then we have the very first cutscene where we see the cutscene incompetence just, smatter its pink blood all over the screen. And it's like, okay, well, that sucks. And then we naturally manage to barely survive jumping down a waterfall, and we have a little tutorial mission, and that's cool. And then we move forward a little bit, and the game, right about at this point, we'd seen like 5 or 6 cutscenes at this point, and I couldn't put my finger on what the problem was. It took me until today, which is a day later, to really put my finger on the problem. The cutscenes aren't good. Now, they're not bad. The voice acting isn't bad. The motion capture isn't bad. But it's very flat. There's no nuance, there's no subtlety, there's no little tidbits, there's no extra details. It's just kind of there. It is competent, but uninspired. Which is not something I like to say because that sounds so damn pretentious, but it's true. There was no oomph behind any of it, so no positives or negatives to the voice acting and the motion capture, all those things that usually garner, well, positives and occasionally garner negatives. So that's just kind of there. But the reason I mention that is because that's something that could have helped salvage the story. Remember, there are 2 really big important things when it comes to the overall umbrella that is story. The story itself and the presentation of the story. Even a stupid character or a badly written character can be presented well through acting or through presentation or charisma or whatever. There are ways to make a character or a story or a plot that is otherwise, work. It's almost always on the presentation side. What this game didn't have was that presentation, which meant it had to lean entirely on the actual core characters, plot, themes, writing, dialogue, etc. None of which were good. And you see why I marked the story so badly. Because it had nothing going for it. The game tries really hard to make the twins the main villain of the game. This is probably the good moment to go ahead and give the spoiler warning, because the twins are not the final boss or even really the main villain of the game. That would be Ethan, Joseph's son. Joseph was the main villain of Far Cry 5, if you're not aware. He is a psychotically evil. That's an exaggeration. I shouldn't say that. Let's be fair. He is a monster. He is a completely evil monster, as most Far Cry villains are. So he has a son named Ethan, who is kind of generic. They started from a decent place. So he is after Joseph leaves, he's in charge of the violent, militant religious zealots, and he doesn't believe what they believe. Okay, that's actually a decent place to start with. He's got a bit of pragmatism about him. He's willing to work with you. He's trying to figure the situation out, get things on top of things. Very quickly, however, he becomes Judas. I'd like to say literally, but someone copy-pasted Judas's story, or rather a bullet point of Judas's story, and just put that onto Ethan, because all of his characterization goes right out the window, and he just becomes a Judas wannabe. Betrays his town for no good reason, gets all of his people killed for no good reason, and then goes to go after his dad for a good reason, and then turns into a monster. I'm not sure if that's for good reason or not. And that's the final boss, is Ethan. Okay. And then you can kill Joseph or not, which I did immediately because screw him, he is a monster. But here's the interesting thing. Right after you kill Ethan, who I remind you was willing to betray his entire town of people to murderous death, and then his father, this really sad music plays as he's dying. And he's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry for everything I've done. Please forgive me. And the game is presented, we get back to that point, as if this is a big tragic moment. I want you to do me a favor. Think of a villain, not a redeemable villain, not a type 2 sympathetic villain. Just think of a monster villain, an evil villain. It doesn't matter what, any fiction. Now imagine that as they die, the game or the show or the movie, the book or whatever, does a really hard job, really tries very difficultly to make them sympathetic as they're dying. Nothing before that. No build-up, no foreshadowing, no character moments, no Darth Vader looking down and contemplative. None of that. Just right there at the finish line. That's a good enough time to segue into talking about the twins. The twins are an Act 1 boss. Now, you know what that means, right? It's a fairly common thing in a lot of works of fiction. Breath of Fire 3 does this. Final Fantasy 6 does this. I'm trying to think of a thing that isn't a JRPG. Arguably, most movies do this to some extent. They have the little villain and then there's the bigger villain behind them. It's there to kind of start the scope and scale and stakes. And then once the hero or heroes have overcome that lesser villain, they become aware of the greater world and the greater threat, and that serves as a natural staircase of progression, both in terms of narrative pacing and in a video game in terms of difficulty, because you're now dealing with bigger things. Cool. That's them. They're that. Their fight is right before the Ethan fight. So for perspective, this is the Ethan fight right here. It's the final boss. And then you have the ending cutscene. And their fight is right before this. Do you see the problem here? What's doubly funny is the twins are probably the worst characters in the game. They are mind-bogglingly stupid, and yet the game constantly tries to portray them as if they're not. As if they're super smart, and at one point the game literally says, they're always 2 steps ahead of us. No, they aren't! And I want to remind you that we've been kicking their asses all the way up and down the county the entire game. In fact, we never stopped doing that. And I know what you're thinking. Lore, you need to separate gameplay and story a little bit. A little bit, yes. But only a little. And this is one of those horrible things when it comes to analyzing a story, because there always has to be a degree of separation between gameplay and story, because what the player can do varies based on their particular skill or abilities or level, right? So what we consider as canon, what we consider that counts when it comes to, the in-lore power. You've heard me refer to this many times. How powerful we are, how skilled we are, how capable we are in lore. It's always just kind of a calculation, and everyone's opinion on that is going to vary based on their experiences with it and their judgments of the information at hand. But holding all that into one big bundle, we still see that in lore, we're still crushing them every time we interact with them. All of the story missions, which are mandatory and therefore can't be skipped, are ones in which we absolutely destroy them. And yet each story mission tries to portray it as if we barely survived and we're just not holding on and we can't do this and we have to go do this entire Eden side quest because we just need the desperate help no matter what. It's the only thing that's going to save us, even though you yourself... What are you doing, game? The twins also like to shove themselves into your face at multiple points in time and only survive 3 separate times that I could think of because of our cutscene incompetence. If not for how stupid we were, they would have been dead either in the first cutscene or maybe in their second. They would have definitely been dead in their third. But somehow we just kind of keep going along with it and they keep surviving. And I suppose this brings me to the final word. I don't have much else to say about this game, really. Except for this last... Well, I actually have 2 things to say about this. I mentioned earlier this game is kind of generically enjoyable on the gameplay axis and kind of generic in terms of the story presentation. Generic's a good word to describe this game, but I've got a much better word. Failure. The game fails to capitalize on its premise. The game fails to characterize its final boss or its final villain. The game fails to utilize the relationship between Ethan and Joseph to any strong degree. The game fails to make the Highwaymen make any kind of sense whatsoever. They apparently just have a roaming army, which we also defeat over the course of the game, by the way. But if they're super threatening right up until the moment we defeat them all. The game fails at making the twins anything. There's a lot of directions they could have gone with that. Oh, and did I mention that right as the twins are dying, the game tries very hard to make them sympathetic, with the sad music and everything. This game is a failure. It scored a negative score on the golden number, which I've held off till mentioning until now, because for those of you aware of how the golden number curve works, any score whatsoever that goes into a negative is bad. So the arc kind of slowly goes up, in order to account for the gradient between games. But it arcs much more harshly down, because that's how math works. So, a difference of 0.5 in negatives is a much bigger difference when it comes down to that. So this game got a negative 2 point, I forget what, but it doesn't matter, because negative 2 is a really bad score. I said I had one last thing to talk about. As we were going through the game, I mentioned this in Spec Ops: The Line. Spec Ops, I think, would have served better by being in a fantastical scenario. The surreal elements, the semi-pseudo-magical stuff that was going on, would have worked a lot better if there literally were dimensions or magic or aliens or monsters or fae or whatever, right? Whatever it is, any kind of fantastical element would have helped with that game, in my opinion. I think that absolutely and doubly more when it comes to Far Cry New Dawn. At one point, we gain literal superpowers from drugs. No, really, we get shot in the chest with a shotgun and we're fine. Oh, and tossed out a window 2 stories up, or 3 stories up, excuse me. We're fine. We lived through that. Because we have drug powers. At one point, we fight a giant drug monster who was mutated and warped into this giant Wendigo, actually, is probably a better word for that thing. Because drug powers. The fantastical elements are already here. Why not embrace that? This goes back to that failure thing. Why not embrace that fantastical concept? The Lara Croft series did that. With magic and fantasy and the freaking underworld. They already kind of did that in the Lara Croft series, both of them. So why not kind of just say, yeah, sure, done, let's do it. And yet they keep wanting to do this very grounded, realistic, believable storytelling, and they just keep failing at it. Hopefully I have not failed in my task at discussing this game. Feel free to tell me in the comments. Later today, we're going to be playing Portal, which, God, I just need that as a palate cleanser at this point. So, I'll see you there.